Welcome to another Truetone Lounge Quarantine Edition, and today we have the wonderful Tim Lerch, who is a jazz guitarist, an educator, and of course a Tele guy. Which of course I'm a hardcore Tele guy. So he reached out to me a while ago, and I've been a fan of his playing for a long time, and so this is a real treat to have Tim. And Tim's coming to us from Seattle. And so how are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing pretty well. The quarantine is on, and we've got some other kind of stuff going on up in our, I live in Tacoma, which is a little south of about 35 minutes south of Seattle. But until a couple of years ago, I lived in Seattle for many years, and there's a couple of neighborhoods that are a little bit, stuff's going on up here. And so there's some stuff going on. And of course, we're all under quarantine, and things were going pretty good for a hot minute, and now they're backing down a little bit. So no gigs. Some gigs that we thought we might have, they asked us to play at Jazz Alley, which is a club, the main jazz club here in town. And we thought we could do it, and then we decided not to do it because it was going to be weird, and then they decided to cancel the date, so the place is not opening. So a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Things have been rescheduled 2 or 3 times.
Right.
Personally, though, I'm doing okay. I'm teaching online, which is something I've been doing for 10 years or so now. Ever since I figured out that you could do it on Skype in about 2009, I've been doing it. It's gotten a lot better since the old days where you'd have to start the call 4 or 5 times, and during a 1-hour lesson to get a good connection. But I'm doing a lot of that, and Truefire has been firing on all cylinders. So I've got a new course that just came out on Truefire.
Yes.
Jazz Blues Pathways, and that's doing well. And I've got a channel on Truefire too, which is a kind of subscription style thing where I put up material there and deal with the incoming questions and trying to create a community like you do in your own way,
right?
About this sort of brotherhood of small world of guitar geeks, So I'm doing okay. The gigs I lost and the money I lost from them has been made up because these 2 Truefire courses came out right at that moment, and they're doing well. So I'm hoping that is going to be enough to carry me over until the gigs start up again. But like everybody, it doesn't matter whether you've been scrounging or you've been doing arenas. Nobody's doing anything right now. So
right,
we're doing our best.
Yeah, I've even had friends that had gigs booked in Florida this past weekend, and they flew down there, and then the gig got canceled, and they had to fly back.
Wow, that's too bad. They didn't find out about it sooner. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Truefire courses, and I checked both of them out, over the last couple of days, and they're both fantastic. Yeah, since you already mentioned, I thought we might as well go ahead and hit upon those. So,
why not?
so the first one is Solo Jazz Pathways, and that one you spend a lot of time, kind of starting on a kind of more elementary level, teaching 2-5-1 changes, and starting out with different chord voicings and inversions, and then you start bringing in a melody line. And I was very impressed with it. It was a great place to start on that type of playing. And
Okay.
yeah, so that's fantastic. And then also I watched some of the Jazz Blues Pathways, in which of course that is more geared toward, you might show the comping part, and then you show how to solo over those changes. And of course the Truefire the way you interact with it, the fact that you can slow things down, and the fact that you have the video of you playing that can be slowed down, and you have both the notation and the tablature and the chord changes over top. It's quite an amazing learning tool, and
Really, yeah, it really is, and it also makes it easier to teach in a way because you don't have to be so granular and say, well, now put your finger here, now put your, and you got all these different stumbly languages about, well, do you call it the D string, or do you call it the fourth string, or do you call it the, and a lot of that stuff just gets, it kind of just clutters up the works.
Right.
So because the learning tools on there, the transcription's right under the video. You can make the video full screen. You can slow things down in a fairly incremental way. You can just take 10% off or something just to bring it into your realm. You can loop it, and you don't have to be quite as granular in the explanation. They know that, and so in order to make it a little more entertaining for the student, they don't want people necessarily, and I never liked this anyway, say, well, you put your first finger on the fifth fret, and then all that kind of stuff, that doesn't really translate to a very enjoyable experience for most people. So I'm really glad that I can teach the way I typically teach. Like when I'm teaching in person, I very often say, get your phone out and make a video of this. And I'll just play it, talk while I play, or play then talk. And I don't have to worry about being so specific, about where to put your fingers. And it's also then for the student really good for their ear and their musical acumen to have to work a little bit of it out themselves and use their ear like we all did, even without video. We had these little, we had these little black discs that we had to put our finger on or play a million times. So, I think it's okay. Too many tools can make it a little bit not so helpful in some ways. Yeah. So using the tools just right so you can create an experience where the person is learning, but they're also having to use their ear and their eyes and develop the skill that we all have to develop. You certainly developed as a young guy learning how to play.
Yeah. I was very impressed with the of course the quality of the video is top notch, and just the transcription and everything. It was just such a great method and such a great way for players that might not have grown up playing jazz by any means, and that want to get into more complex voicings yet are still melodic. It's not like you're playing outside jazz. You're playing stuff that's accessible to anybody.
Well, the genesis of that first one, the solo guitar pathways, was a video that I made that lives on YouTube now. Is somebody asked me, can you, because I'm known as a solo guitar player, not just a jazz guitar player, but I play unaccompanied guitar a lot. I do other things too, but especially on YouTube, you're at home and what are you going to do, And I don't like backing tracks so much, so I just play solo. And so someone said, can you improvise as well when you're playing solo? And I said, of course you can. And I made a video about how I think about it, or one of the ways I think about it. And it got a lot of attention. People liked it, got good response. And then so when I was thinking of what could I do for my first Truefire course, I thought, well, why don't I expand on that idea? So the idea is really not so much about learning a million voicings, but actually taking simple voicings that we all know and trying to put melody up above them as an improvisational idea. So let's say we've got, so that's an improvisation. I'm thinking melody, and I have, because I'm putting my energy and attention to the melody, I want to have this sort of stock harmonic movement and bass movement that I can play, that I don't have to think about too much. So I'm not inventing the entire thing. I can concentrate on the melody, Right. So that's kind of what that particular course is geared to. Now, I tried to make, inside of each section, I tried to make a basic thing and a little more advanced thing, so that somebody who's never heard of a 2-5-1 before isn't in the weeds right away, and then somebody who has and is just looking for a way to expand their playing, then they have something too. It's really hard to find the target, because
Right.
it could be anybody. That's
Right.
the one thing about Truefire is they have just this big. You cast a very big net, but then you don't know what's going to be in your net.
Right. But I think you've done a great job of kind of starting at more, not completely elementary, but starting at more of a basic level and then getting more and more complex as
Yeah, thank you.
the different series goes along. So
Thank you.
let's give us the how'd you pick up the guitar and how'd you get into solo guitar
Oh,
playing?
interesting. Thank you for that question. Like everybody, I was a little kid and I liked music. I always sang. And I think I started playing harmonica and I tried to play drums. I had a little buddy that played drums and we would get together and I would sing and he'd play drums. And I wanted to play something. I started playing harmonica. I remember learning the harmonica solo to Love Me Do, or that little intro.
Yes.
And then not too long after that, I had a paper route, and I made a little bit of money and I bought a guitar. So I probably started playing guitar at 12 or something like that. Oddly, my earliest memories are musical memories. But you probably the same way. If they creep in, and like I don't remember, when I was a tiny kid, I don't remember, going to a baseball game or riding my bike, but I remember being up on the top bunk with a transistor radio, in
Hmm.
1961 or two, and listening to AM radio, and for some reason, I don't know what this is, but my mom liked listening to music as well. She played piano in the evenings after dinner, mostly just church songs, and but she liked to listen to country radio. I remember crack radio in Sacramento, which is the town. I grew up near Sacramento, and crack radio was, in 1961 or two or three. You can imagine what was on the AM country station,
Hmm.
kind of the kind of country music that we still like,
Yes. Yeah.
that we wish that it was still like.
Yes.
But I remember feeling like, and I didn't play guitar or anything, but I remember feeling like this is what I wanted to do. And I have no idea. So when I got my guitar the very first time, I put my hand down and I went, I mean, who knows what that is? But
Yeah.
so anyway, that was the sort of the preliminary stuff. Then I got a guitar and I started doing what we all do. You learn a D chord and you learn a couple of other chords and you learn a little part of a song. You learn little bits and pieces. And by the time I got to be, say, 15, I think, or so, I could get around a little bit on the instrument, and I sang and played, and I didn't really like the kind of music that all my friends liked. They were at that time in junior high and high school. There were a few things, anything it seemed like acoustic guitar was enticing to me. I really liked pop radio, top 40 radio. How old are you?
I'm 47.
Okay, so I'm a little older than you. So
Yeah.
I was listening to pop radio. It was really eclectic.
Yes.
You could hear, Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, and you could hear, probably not a James Brown song, but you could hear, an R&B song, and you could hear a sappy thing, by this band over there, and then
Yeah.
you could hear a real dumb pop song and some hip stuff too.
Right.
Uh,
Or you could hear the
and
little elephant walk or something like that. You could
yeah,
hear, yes, I do remember kind of the tail end of that era when you had the stations that played a really wide variety of music.
even
Yeah.
even even if it was just a AM pop station, pop music was wider. It wasn't so boxed like
Right.
it is now. And I could memorize the songs. I could hear them and know what song it was by just the first couple of chords. So I had musical, inclinations. But I didn't really like Kiss and Led Zeppelin and Ted Nugent and all, that was the kind of stuff that by the time I was in junior high, my friends were into. And if you wanted to be in a band, likely that's the kind of band that it would be, or
Right.
whatever. I didn't hate that stuff, but it just wasn't my thing. And somehow, and I'm not sure exactly how, I got a record by Joe Tex because
Yeah.
there was a hit on the radio called I Gotcha.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember that, but I got the
Yes.
45 of it. And then on the flip side, I wish I could figure out what this song was. You might know. On the flip side of the 45 of I Gotcha was this really great R&B ballad with cool little, all that stuff, all that Cornell Dupree, kind of
Right.
business. And I don't know who any of it was, but and then I went, oh, that, right? That has something. I Got You was a fun dance number, but that thing on the B side really captured my attention. And so slowly that, black music in general, R&B ballads, blues, jazz kind of started to take up my interest.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a Lightning Hopkins record, and I'm a white kid in the suburbs. I'm probably 13 or 14 years old, and I'm trying to play Lightning Hopkins in the living room on the stereo. And my mom's kind of wondering, it makes her nervous a little bit, not nervous because of any other thing, but the sound of the music isn't what she was used to.
Right.
And but I'm listening to that, and I ended up going to the record store and spending all my paper route money on literally any record with a black guy on the cover. I mean, it was really interesting to me how that worked. And I stumbled into a lot of cool records. Like I got an Art Tatum record with Tiny Grimes on guitar and
Yeah.
Slam Stewart on bass. And I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. The most incredible thing. Of course, I really got into the John Mayall Blues Breakers record and with Eric Clapton, and subsequently the Layla record was probably about as close as I got to pop music, in my listening life. But I searched around. I found like I liked these old records like Mance Liscombe and Lightning Hopkins and this sort of raggy sort of Blind Blake. I could never play like him, but I loved the music, That is sort of, that kind of business, right? And so I'm thinking, oh, you can play a whole thing,
Right.
And I remember once earlier than that, I was playing, my 2-chord over and over and over thing I was trying to learn. And my dad, who's not musical at all, couldn't keep a tune, didn't have any interest, never listened to music. He said, Timmy, why don't you play a song I can recognize and play it all the way through? And it's like, that's the best piece of musical advice anybody ever gave me. I mean, I didn't like it at the time because it sounded like a criticism.
Yeah.
But I realized in order to try and fulfill that command from my father, it influenced another part of my musical development, which was to play songs that I could convey the parts, and it made it really hard when I wanted to get into a teenage band because I was trying to play all the stuff and they only wanted
Right.
me to play the thing that was on the record, So, one thing led to another, and I heard Charlie Parker and I heard big band music. And I remember talking to my music teacher when I was a freshman in high school, and I was in the big band playing, and I asked him, I said, well, what do I have to do to learn how to go like the horn section? I want to play the song like the horn section.
Yeah.
Ba boo ba ba boo 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 boo. And he goes, oh, it's not possible to do that.
Yeah.
Right. But I didn't think I believed him. And so,
Good.
50 years later, here I am.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The whole solo guitar thing. Yeah, you hit upon it through like Lightning Hopkins and Chet and Merle Travis. All that was supposed to be just solo guitar. And then I think at times, Chet would simplify his playing and have strings in the background or a small rhythm section. But if like Merle Travis records, they just have, him playing guitar, or it's him playing guitar and him singing. But much of his stuff. But yes, and then Lightning Hopkins. Sometimes they would have a band with him, but a lot of times, I mean, the way he played was because that was the way he was gigging, was him singing and playing guitar. And that's it. Yeah.
And yeah, if they put a band on it, maybe, like, I know Chet, and I don't blame him for this, because we saw the results and the results were good, but he would take what was probably something he could play by himself and then put an orchestra with him of some kind, a band orchestra, and then it was more palatable to a broader audience, and there were maybe even sometimes singers or whatever, and I think that was what the industry wanted talented musicians to do, is to play music that was palatable to a large group, and that's so you got to weed through some of that stuff, but there's always beautiful stuff in there, in spite of whether it's covered with all kinds of production type things or whatever. There's always good stuff in there, and I love piano players and any orchestras. So these days my big influences are orchestras and piano players, not so much guitar players.
Right. So what drew you to the Telecaster? Because again, there's kind of this
brotherhood. Huh?
There's the cult of the Telecaster, and then there's also the cult of the jazz Telecaster players, which is another really interesting.
It's a smaller cult.
Yeah, it's a smaller cult, but it's a because you get the. You get the Ed Bickert and the Ted Greenes, and then you get more modern, I guess somewhat more modern players like Bill Frisell, or a younger player like Julian Lage, and you have all these. Well, one of the things that happens is I play an ES-175 for a long time. My first really good, jazz box. Well, my first really good jazz box was a Birdland. Oh, yeah.
And like a fool, I don't remember what my teenage brain was thinking, I traded it for something else. And then I ended up eventually buying a 1952 ES-175 with a single P90 for $400 from a lady in the neighborhood whose son didn't want it anymore, something like that. But then I proceeded to stuff it full. Eventually, as I started playing more and more louder and trying to use it in bigger situations and whatnot, I had to put underwear drawer full of stuff in there to keep it from feeding back. And so eventually, I was influenced by Ed Bickert and by Ted Greene, strongly by Ted Greene, and they both played Teles. I liked Roy Buchanan really a lot.
Yeah.
And it just turned out that as I started to discover who I liked and what I liked, they played Telecasters. And eventually I started playing a Telecaster to play in R&B and cover bands and things, because the 175 was not going to work.
Right.
And then I realized that I got comfortable with the Telecaster, and some of the things that I started to do on the Telecaster I couldn't really do on the 175, because if you played, a chord that was like this on a 175, you couldn't really get those bottom notes would start to roar or whatever it might be.
Right.
It turned out as my hand grew a little bit, as my hands grew, I liked the scale length. I liked the fact that you could get this would do something, but when you threw it back there, you could do a whole nother thing. I mean, it seemed like there was a lot more versatility in it, but it wasn't for me a compromise in the sound that I was looking for. So eventually, after a long struggle of thinking I was a jazz player, so I needed to play the 175 because Jim Hall was my hero, and
Right.
But then I started to see Ed sounded great and Ted sounded great, and There's a guy named Sam Brown who made only a couple of records and then died when he was younger. He was an early adopter of the Telecaster. Joe Beck played a Telecaster. A lot of the fusion guys. Turns out that Howard Roberts and Barney Kessel and a lot of the guys that were making records and, even jazz records, they used Telecasters in the studio for various, and sometimes for jazz as well. So it just turned out that it's a good guitar that works for what I want it to do. I can make it very playable. I can tune it down, which I love to do. I can't really tune an arch top down because they're so dedicated to how the tension is on it. I also played in R&B bands and country bands and all kinds of those kind of bands. You needed a guitar that would, and I played Strats for years too, or a Strat for years. Yeah. So, but when I finally got around to realizing I had to make a living, I needed a couple of solid body guitars. And so Fenders were more comfortable to me than the shorter scale things.
Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be a better note separation on them. That it seems like on a Gibson with the scale length and with the fatter, kind of smokier tone that they produce, it's harder to hear the separation between the notes at times.
Especially on the bottom strings. Yeah. I feel like this extra half an inch that we give ourselves, or a little bit more, 3/4 of an inch, gives us a harmonic palette on the low strings that's much more piano-like. Yes. So I mean, for instance, I love this sound. That's sort of really low. And I can't do that. I have a lot of arch tops, and I love them. I like the longer scale ones better than the shorter scale ones.
Yes.
But they won't do this sound. That church organ kind of thing, Yeah. So I just love doing it, and that's my thing on Teles.
So one of the things I've been curious about, and maybe you can clue me in here, where did the neck shaking thing come from? So I felt like maybe it was Bill Frisell, but then someone reminded me that Ted Greene was doing it, perhaps earlier. So I was just wondering, where did you learn that from Ted, or?
Well, I believe that Ted is probably my biggest solo guitar influence, because I studied with him and loved that record that he made, and was a little more than a little bit obsessed with the sounds he would make. And what I was one of the big things about Ted that I love about him is not so much only just that he played lots of great chords, but he always got a beautiful sound.
Yes.
And he really got a very rich, beautiful sound. And I've been kind of questing after that. I'm probably more influenced by Ted in that regard than I am by chord fingerings and all that kind of stuff. So I think everybody at some point, I mean, even Red Volkart does his version of it. Guys will do it. You see this sort of,
Yes.
So I think for me, where I got it, the notion of it was from Ted, but I do it a little differently than Ted, and I paid attention to what he did, but a lot of people thought he had like a Parkinson's or something, because he was doing this with his hand out in space.
Yes.
And you can't really tell why he's doing it. So what I do for this is I put the guitar so that the lower horn is against my leg subtly. And then instead of pulling it like this, which is too wide for me, I just pump my forearm.
Right.
And then sometimes, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say you're pushing it against your leg. Yeah.
Right. So it's firm here, and then I'm bending the body with my forearm.
Okay.
I got too much going on over here to worry about pushing and pulling too much.
Right.
But sometimes though, the other part of it is I think it's the best chorus sound ever.
Well, and you can turn it off and on very easily instead of it taking over your sound.
I mean, that's just beautiful. But it also does something else. It fixes another problem, which isn't as much of a problem now as it was for me a little while ago. Is it makes the guitar sound less out of tune.
Yes.
Because it's wobbly, and so you can never really, I can never really get the guitar satisfactorily in tune. I fight with it all the time. The tuners don't help me.
No.
Even a really good one sort of don't, because I just a little retrograde here. It turns out that the guitar players I liked when I was a kid were the ones that had a nice sound and played in tune to my ear. Somebody could be really fancy and really like blazing, and everybody could say, "Oh, check this guy out." I'd listen to it and I'd say, "It doesn't sound in tune to me."
Yes.
On a very subtle level. So for me, that's important. The guitar players that I like are the guitar players who tune it the way I think it should sound.
Yes. Tuning is a real battle, and
well, it's personal too. It is personal, and before tuners, it was even more personal.
Yes.
We don't have time for this now, but if you just really quick, if you tune an A seventh chord to the harmonics of the overtone series on the A string, then the third will be flat, the flat seventh will be even flatter, and it'll sound like the most incredible A7 chord you've ever heard. But if you play an E chord or a D chord, it sounds like you didn't tune your guitar.
Right.
Right. And so for me, a lot of times this sort of natural sound of intonation is more to my liking. So the old blues guys, they kind of tuned to the earth. They didn't tune to a piano or anything. And they only played sometimes just one chord or one key, and they just got it where they wanted it, and it was really, organic sounding. That's kind of made an impression on me too. So anyway.
Yeah, and the more of the neck that you're covering in a tune, the harder it is. When you're playing all over the neck, you have that much more to deal with. Yes, the compensated saddles are.
Now that I got these,
helpful.
It really helps. But being out of tune is the worst. I could play the most, physically, cool technical thing or a beautiful, passage, and if it's not in tune, it ruins it for me. I can't overlook it. I can't say, oh,
right.
And my idea of in tune is, I think, maybe a little more picky than some. I don't know. I'm sure there are producers out there who are really tuned into like, okay, play that again, and this time play it in tune.
Yes, producers, whether LA or here in Nashville, they're very, very picky about tuning, and that's the thing.
One of their jobs, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So on the Telecaster, obviously that looks like a Fender Custom Shop Nocaster.
Yeah, that's what I like the Nocasters, because, and this also is part of this neck wiggling thing, is they have a big neck. They have it's like 0.96 at the first fret, and
wow,
and like maybe almost 1 at the 12th fret. Mm-hmm. Not huge, but big. And it's also, you notice it's got this splotchy bird's eye.
Right.
I noticed that the splotchy bird's eye is perfect because the quarter sawn is too rigid.
Yes.
And the flamey, the real stripedy flame ones, they're too insecure.
Yes.
That wood's really soft because that's a flaw, And I had a Cunetto Nocaster with a flamey neck. I couldn't keep it in tune.
Yes.
This batch of them made around 2000, the year 2000, 2001. They must have got a big tree of it or something. Mm-hmm. And I just love this particular. And they start out as closet classics, and then I play them, and the nitro chips off and does weird stuff. But they all started. I have 3 or 4 of them. They all started out as closet classics that weren't relicked.
Yeah. And you hit upon some really interesting things. Yes, because you're right. Because the real firm, those plain, quarter sawn necks, they are more rigid, and they have more fundamental to them. And they don't bend as well. But yes.
Yeah, the necks don't bloom as much, and they have the mass, which I really like the mass. They're not bad by any means, but it's just a little different. These guys bloom, but they're still stable enough.
Right.
For my purposes. Yeah.
Yes. I experienced a Telecaster neck that had too much flame to it, and I was living in Europe at the time, and the neck was twisting and going all over the place because there was no central air and heat where I was staying. Yeah. And so it was a dobro one day, and then a month later it was the frets were against the neck and were against the strings. And yes, and you hit upon a really important issue that can happen
Yeah,
with
they look
overly
great.
flamed. Yeah.
Those flamey ones look great, but you think about it, it just makes the wood softer to have that much variation in the grains.
Yes.
That's my idea anyway.
Yeah. So there's early 2000s Nocasters. You've got some type of compensated saddles.
Yeah, I use Glendale's, and Dale over at Glendale is very nice to me, and recently sent me a kind of a thank you gift for talking about his gear so
Yeah.
much. And I use them. I just buy one. I just buy a set every time I get a new guitar. I just buy a set of these things and put them on.
Yeah.
And I like them the best of all of the ones. I'm not saying anything else isn't any good, but I like these the best because for me they look, sound, and feel like what I want them to do. They're
Right.
vintage. They're vintage enough, and they're in tune like nobody's business. And then he put the screws that you raise and lower. He put them in the right spot so the string never bumps into them, and they don't bump into your hand. You can get them recessed. So it's just they got everything right on
Wow.
these.
Those are nice touches because yes, there can be an issue with the string and the height adjustment, being in the wrong place.
I'm really picky about the strings being in the right place, because I'm articulating individual notes on individual strings with individual fingers. What a
Right.
concept, right? If I was just strumming, it probably wouldn't make any difference. But if the A string was always the culprit, it would be like too close to the E string,
Right.
just by a little bit, and it would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
So.
And then those are Lawler
Yeah, I
pickups.
put Lawler, Charlie Christian, and this is a Lawler BS. This one has got. This is my main guitar that I played in bands and on stages for years. It's got a Lawler here and a 52 Lawler 52 bridge, which is kind of more traditional sounding. Works pretty good. It doesn't balance really great with this pickup.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine in the in between position, but it's a little weak when you put it back here. So
Right.
I usually stick on a clean boost when I use the back pickup anyway. So that's how I fix that.
When you're playing, if you're playing with a band or playing solo guitar, do you tend to use different instruments or have things set up
Yeah.
differently?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to go play guitar like I have done many, many times, I've had long running restaurant gigs or concert series or whatever, I'll use this guitar tuned a half step down.
Okay.
And I like it. I like this middle pickup for two reasons. One is on some kinds of tunes, it's nice to have that, mid scoop and a little chimey. The bells sound really nice with both of these pickups on. So I have this like a Stratocaster 5-way switch.
Yeah.
And the other thing is if I get into a noisy room, when you're playing solo and you're in a noisy room, it's kind of nowhere to hide.
No.
So these two pickups, when they're combined, are hum canceling. So that gives me a little more safety there. And this guitar is wired so it's like a Strat, neck and middle, bridge and middle, bridge. And then I have a pull pot here that means I can put the bridge pickup together with the neck pickup to have a real telly sound.
Right.
Or I can, if it's in this position, all three of them are on, which is actually a very nice sound as well.
Yeah.
For if I want to play a chord style thing in a band or something, it's nice to have a little more treble and a little bit more cutting, and so I can put all
Right.
three of them on, and it sounds really kind of neat that way. Anyway, so that's that one.
Yeah, it's big with clarity to it. So
Yeah.
So you tune that one a half. And what strings do you use?
It's a compromise. I want to be able, on this guitar, I might do a jazz gig with a band as well, so I have to be able to bring it up to pitch E standard and not kill myself.
Right.
So I have it set up so that I can have it at E flat, and it's probably a little too soft in E flat, and then I can bring it up to regular E tuning, a standard E, and it feels good. And like for instance, when I did the thing at Truefire, I have to be in standard tuning.
Right.
So for all of my teaching, I try and do it in standard tuning. So I want to be able to bring this guitar up to pitch. Now this one here, I for years I used 11 to 50 or 11 to 49, and then I got these D'Addario balanced tension set, which is 11 to 50. I like it a lot. And then I just started noticing that, I wasn't doing blues gigs where I had to bend strings a lot. So I just put 12s on this one too, tuned to
Okay.
pitch.
So that's
So
what you normally use is a 12 set of Diodarys?
yeah, they make this set that goes 12 to 54
Mm-hmm.
with a 20 plain G.
Yeah.
That works for me because I used to take the 12 to 52 set and then swap out it, buy a bunch of plain 20s and swap it out. Now I discovered they make this other set that's got a slightly heavier low E and it's perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what I use on a Telecaster that I have, which is tuned down a whole step or a minor third. I use 14 to 60 on it and a 22 plane. A 22 plane is as big as I can find that doesn't sound weird.
Yeah.
I think you can find a 24 plane, but it sounds weird to me. So
Yeah, that's a big plain string, and you would mainly use that for solo playing. You wouldn't use that
solo
in a band.
and accompanying singers, either myself or another singer.
Okay, but
Because it's like having a B3, It's like
right.
those. Because I play this sort of. Let's say I'm going to accompany a singer, and we're going to play whatever song it is. I might say. In that sort of style. And if you got a bigger string on there and it's tuned down to D, transposition is not too hard. It's just a whole step. And
Right.
if you're playing a song that you already know and you learned it in D, you just have to play it in E as if. And it just gives you this big roar down there, and I love it. And
Yeah.
it's a little harder to get it to work in a room because that bottom end is you got to deal with it, but it feels so good. So I use that one for solo guitar and for accompanying singers.
Yeah. Again, where it's you and a singer.
Just the two of us, yeah.
Right. Right. Now, do you
Is it-
use Do you use any effects? Yeah.
No, just a chord and my favorite pedal is, I always say, my favorite pedal is the gas pedal on the car, which gets me to the gig.
I love it. I just wondered, because you were mentioning B3. I wonder if you would, put on
I've
some
tried
tremolo.
I have a pedal board. I have a pedal board that I used to use when I played, the R&B type and blues band scene.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where I didn't want to do that anymore because I was losing my hearing playing loud music.
Right.
Which is something, we all have to contend with. And some of us are in denial about it and some of us, shouldn't be. But I just was coming home, half deaf every time. The drummer I was playing with was killing me. And being on a small stage and someone's smacking his snare real hard or whatever. And anyway, so I decided I didn't want to play in loud music. And so the pedal board kind of went into the closet then. So I play in a band called Pearl Django, and I play an archtop guitar in that, just straight into the amp, and it's kind of more acoustic electric blend.
Yeah.
And then I play solo guitar on one of these, playing a couple of different guitar duos, which are also, I could use either one, whatever strikes my fancy, but we play quietly, and I don't use pedals anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to them.
Yeah. What kind of amp do you use?
Right now I'm playing through a Princeton Reverb,
Yeah.
which stays here at home. Deluxe Reverb used to be my go-to for all the band gigs. I would clip the bright cap
Yes.
on the reverb channel.
Necessary.
I have a really nice Fuchs ODS 50,
Yeah.
and then Andy made me a Princeton-sized ODS 30 that I really like, but I haven't really used them much because the people would very often say, "My God, it sounds great, Tim, but it's too loud," and I heard that one too many times. And then as you get older, you start wanting to schlep less stuff. So with Pearl Django, I use a very light rig. I use a Quilter 202 reverb, which is this little head stuffed inside of a 1x12 cabinet that looks like an old Gibson EH-185.
Wow.
So it's made by a guy down in San Pedro, California, whose company is Vintage 47. And he makes a kind of octal preamp tube remake of the EH-185. EH-85? I can't remember exactly. The bigger of the Charlie Christian amp.
Right.
And I asked him, he made one for me, and I thought it was great. And I said, can you make me just the cabinet? And because I wanted to, a 12-pound thing that I could carry, to the gig. And because we're often getting on ferries, and it's so expensive to drive onto the ferry. You walk on, and you got to schlep your gear up and down the ramp and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
it just makes it nicer if you just got like a guitar on your shoulder and a nice little amp with a few things stuffed in the back. And so I use a quilter. I like the 202. The 101 was good too, but it was a little bright for my ear and a little bit. It was like a black-faced amp without the bright cap clipped.
Okay.
And so the 202 gave me a little bit more flexibility. I actually gave them some input that I think they might have incorporated into that version. And so I have a nice little grab-and-go, vintage-looking, cool-looking amp that everybody says they like it. Sound men all like it, and it can be as loud and clean or as quiet and clean as I need it to be, and so it's very flexible.
That's fantastic. So I've got to hit upon just, we've talked a little bit about Ted Greene, but also like Lenny Breau and just some of these guys that are not with us anymore. That tell us about what taking a lesson with Ted Greene was like.
Okay, yeah, I would love to do that. I was obsessed with Ted. I met him at the NAMM show. I was working at a music store when I was in high school, and the owner of the music school said, "Hey Tim, do you want to come with me down to the NAMM show?" And I said, "Sure." It was really great. This is the old NAMM show,
Right.
And I walk in the door with this guy, and I'm kind of like this. And first, the man walks up to me, shakes my hand, and says, "Hi, my name is Mel Bay. Hey, welcome to the NAMM show." And it's like, whoa, Mel Bay, really? And at that show, I saw Herb Ellis, and I saw all these people who were just out there, hawking their wares, And Ted was playing in the Dale Zednick booth. Because that was the publisher of his books.
Right.
And the record had come out. This was probably 1975, maybe 75. And I was 16. Yeah, that's about right, 75. So the record had been out a little while. The books had been out a little while. And I wandering around the NAMM show, and I see Ted Greene playing. Of course, I was too shy to introduce myself. I just stood there, agog. And then later on, maybe after I got out of high school, I was hanging out on the local Sacramento jazz guitar scene, and a guy whose name was Doug Pauly, who I think still lives and plays in Sacramento, said, "Hey, I hear you like Ted Greene," and by that time I was playing some solo guitar. I have his telephone number. Do you want it? And I said, "Yes, please." So he gave me Ted's phone number, and one day I just called him up. And he answered, which was actually kind of not common. He would often not answer the phone. I don't think he had an answering machine. I think he either answered it or he didn't answer it, So and I called him and I introduced myself, and he was very friendly. He excused himself for a minute. He said he was taping a Jimmy Cagney movie because he liked the music score, and he had to make sure that he flipped the tape over. I mean, it was like, that's a Ted thing. And so I told him what I was trying to do. I told him I wanted to incorporate more walking bass lines into my playing, and that I had a few arrangements and solo guitar things that I was doing, and I really loved his playing, and blah, 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 blah. I gave him the whole spiel. So he said, "Okay, well, I can mail you some things." So he wrote me this beautiful handwritten, cursive page of information, and it took a while, though. He apologized at the top of the page. "Sorry it took me so long." I think I sent him $5, which is ridiculous, and he sent me 3 or 4 pages of his little grid pages, these little dot pages, Of
Yes.
course, his are crammed. I mean, he wrote, and in the margins there were all this tiny writing, and I studied that stuff. And then maybe a year later, my girlfriend at the time was in Davis, California, going to school. She would go down to her folks' house in Southern California around Thanksgiving. So I set up a lesson with Ted the day after Thanksgiving. He was in Woodland Hills living at his parents' house on Winnetka Street. And so I drove down from Agoura Hills to Woodland Hills and had an afternoon lesson. Still have the tape of it. And that began, our relationship. And then every time I would come down, I'd try and book a lesson. And then I finally, in 1983, moved down to LA. And it was just as hard to get to him, though, because I didn't have a car, and he lived in the Valley and I lived in Hollywood. But I went up to see him as often as I could. And what it's like to take a lesson with Ted Greene. First of all, he was kind and generous and really warm. He was probably the first adult man that I ever met who exhibited a kind of gentleness that was part of his being. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And he was insightful. He was philosophical. He was tended to wander in his thinking, and it would be tangential. So you taped it, and and for me, I didn't care. I was just there hanging, and he showed me a lot of stuff, but I got the impression that he was feeling me out at first to see what I needed, and he reassured me a lot. He gave me a lot of confidence that I was, on the right track. Showed me some cool things. And one of the first things he showed me is I played him Body and Soul, a little arrangement that I had made. And he said, "Oh, that's really nice, Tim, but try this on the first note." So he showed me how to go underneath the melody, and that got me hooked on inner lines. Just that one thing. It got me hooked on this idea that there's a bass line, there's a melody, and then there's these beautiful things swimming in the middle.
Right.
And that's been a lifelong quest, It's funny. I can't really know what it was like to take a lesson from Ted in any other way than filtered through my sort of crush that I had on him.
Yeah.
I was enamored with him, and so I wanted him to like me, and I wanted him to be my friend, and and all that kind of stuff, because he was so wonderful and played music so beautifully. So a lot. I don't think I've very successfully kind of cleared that out. I might have just been more fanboying a little bit too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we all do that. I was young and precocious and kind of obnoxious probably. And he was very, very sensitive. So, it wasn't always, okay, Tim, I'm going to show you all the best stuff,
Right.
But I persevered, and I studied with him from, through the mail and then in person from 83 till about 86. And then I went on the road and didn't see him after that. But I got a bunch of his material. Some other friends of mine were in the sort of the Ted Greene underground, and there was a stack of about that many pages that people had collected and shared. Now you can get it all on tedgreene.com, but I got that stack, and literally he would give me something to work on. I would go away and I'd come back 6 months later, having worked on it pretty much every day, and so there's a lot. He would give you a lot of work, and his pages still aren't very easy to, make your way through.
Right.
So fire hose situation, kind of like, trying to drink out of a fire hose. It was a little bit like that. But it was also cool. The lesson would be over and it would be the last one of the day. And he found out I liked blues and B.B. King, and he would, then it wouldn't be a lesson anymore. It'd just be like, talking about his favorite shit. And, that was fun.
Mm-hmm. What about Lenny Breau?
Well, Lenny was, really quite different. The first time I met Lenny, I can't remember what happened. I was at GIT at the time, and it got circulated around that Lenny was in town staying at a guy named David Rose's house. And I think David Rose was a Hollywood music producer or a string writer or something. I can't remember exactly. But I found out that I could drive up to this guy's house and Lenny would be there. So I booked a lesson with Lenny, And it was very interesting. I remember when I shook hands with him, he shook hands with his thumb, like he didn't shake hands like this with his thumb up. He had his thumb down. So that was like a funny impression because he didn't want anybody to hurt his hand.
Right.
When they shook his hand. So he developed this way of shaking hands with it, which was sort of more like this than like that, you know. And that was my first like, oh, okay, that's interesting. He was a little tiny guy. And we had a wonderful hour or maybe two at an afternoon in this guy's house. But Lenny was funny because he liked hanging out. For him, it was just hanging out. And I'd ask him a question, he'd talk about it, and then I'd play something for him, and he would say, "No, wait, show me what are you doing there?" You know, and he would ask me what I was doing, and I would, well, you know, I'm doing this. Oh yeah. And this, you know, so it was really, you know, kind of give and take. And then didn't see him for a while after that. And then went to Dante's to hear him and got his, because he had moved to LA by then. He was living in the Wilshire district. Got his telephone number, and went over to his apartment in the Wilshire district on a number of occasions. By that time, I had a 7-string guitar, and so I was curious about trying to get the high A thing to work.
Right.
And I would see him occasionally at GIT. I remember one fun time I used to hang out with Joe DiOrio when I was at GIT. He was my favorite. He still is. I love him. And I would just go into Joe's office, just like when he was there for the week that he was there every other week. I would just go in his office. I wouldn't even go to class. I would just go into his office. And he liked me, and we'd go to lunch most days. And one day Lenny showed up, and Joe and Lenny and me went out to lunch. And that was so funny because Joe was about that tall, and Lenny was about that tall, and I'm this sort of gangly, stringy-haired kid, you know, and, you know, about a foot taller than both of them. And so that was funny. I kind of felt like I was floating. We went to this little diner and just had a nice lunch and hung out. And I got to be a fly on the wall listening to those guys talking about life and music and stuff. I was, unfortunately, this is not my favorite story, but I was at Lenny's apartment on a Thursday in the summer of '84. It was the Thursday before he was killed.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, and we had a beautiful afternoon. I met his wife and his little daughter, and he showed me the pool. He was very proud of the pool because he was laying out by the pool and getting sun, and he was clean at the time and functioning pretty well. But that was the last time I saw him. And, you know, the next Monday I heard that he was gone. I was teaching at GIT at that time, and went to my summer session class and heard that Lenny was gone. So anyway, I love Lenny. And I have this recording of Lenny and Ted meeting for the first time, and it's really fascinating to see the difference of their, you know, the way they thought about music, and two most wonderful players ever, and they were just so different, and you know, but complementary. For me, it was great to see both sides of that because Lenny was a real poet, you know, and Ted was more of a scientist.
Right.
But Ted was one of the most beautiful and sensitive and emotionally connected guitar players ever. So he wasn't like a brainiac. When he played, he could convey emotions like nobody, you know. But Lenny lived in this world of this sort of ephemeral world of, you know, beauty and you know, it's just very interesting to see it.
Yeah, from watching footage of Ted that there is, you know, on YouTube, it's very evident that he had this very analytical side where he was analyzing tone, he was analyzing anything that he was listening to and chord voicings and on and on and on. He was really taking things apart and putting them back together in ways that worked for him.
One of the things that happened on that tape is Lenny was playing something. They were kind of sharing a guitar. Ted didn't bring a guitar, which is sad. Somebody gave him a Telecaster that the guy's house he was at, and he played a little bit. But they were playing a nylon string guitar and sharing it back and forth. And Lenny was playing Stella by Starlight or something, and he talked about a chord that he got from Bill Evans. You know, that was the way Lenny learned. He learned one sound at a time. He was really listened to records and experimented, and he would come up with a sound that he liked. And then he was a genius about how he could use it. And it was very interesting, though, because Lenny played this one chord. And he said, hey, Ted, have you ever heard this chord? Lenny kind of stuttered and talked a little interestingly. And Ted says, oh, yeah, that's a beautiful chord. And then Ted picks up the guitar and plays the chord scale of that voicing. Right? And he had thought about it. He had come across that voicing before, and he had developed the ability to play it at every degree of the key, right? Which is what we think of as a chord scale.
Right.
And it wasn't any better than what Lenny did. It was just, it showed that Ted would think in systems and Lenny would think in colors.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And also at that time, and I think forever after that, Ted considered Lenny to be the best guitar player in the world. He just was really in awe of him and respected him greatly. And then he took a lot of the things that he learned from hanging around with him and listening and took it to a very high level. So on YouTube, there's a couple of videos of Ted that are called Ted Explaining Lenny or Ted's Lenny Lesson and all the harmonics and all this stuff. And Ted had it down, he really had it down.
Yeah, I guess if anyone could decipher and absorb that, Ted could.
Yeah, and when he was at the peak of his powers, Ted was physically and technically just unstoppable. It was incredible what he could do, and musical at the same time. And that was what really attracted me to him. Is it sounded so beautiful. I mean, and warm and luscious, but you knew it was really, really hard.
Yeah. Well, Tim, this has been fantastic to
Seems like it has to be part one.
Yes, this has been it's been wonderful to kind of to meet you and
nice.
Yes, and and to get some of your story. And I'm really glad we were able to talk about your Truefire series, which I really highly recommend that guys that are wanting to expand their playing and wanting to get either into the jazz blues side, with that course, or the chord melody. Those are really great methods.
Yeah, and there's many more coming too. There's a bunch of them in the hopper. And I also want to mention I have this thing called a channel on Truefire, which is a $10 a month subscription. And I just post stuff up there all the time. And there's about 100 videos up, and all of them have, basically it's called Solo Guitar Sensei. And the idea is it's focused on solo guitar. I'm broadening it a little bit because I want to make sure it's more and more people can get something out of it. I had to bring the level down a little bit, but I'm learning as I go. And it's just basically talking about the stuff I love, just because I'm a nerd with this stuff, and
right.
And to create a community of like-minded folks is really something that I'm interested in doing. So you can go to Truefire and find that and check it out and come see it. There's a lot of stuff you can just take a look at it. You don't have to sign up or anything. You can just look at it.
Wonderful. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us and for appearing on the lounge. It's a true honor, and we're gonna have to do it again. We are gonna have to do a part two at some point.
I want to come to Nashville for part two.
Please, that would be more fun for us. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was supposed to go to Nashville in July, the second week of July, and I was going to visit John Knowles, who's a pal of mine, and
yes.
I was going to go to the Chet Atkins appreciation thing, and John had set up some things that a couple of guys, in addition to you, there were a couple of guys that I really wanted to meet that live in Nashville, and of course then I couldn't go, but now it's a big flag on my whenever we can go, we're going, and I want to tell you, Zach, I'm a fan. I like what you're doing. I appreciate how knowledgeable and careful and caring you are about the music that you love and about the guitar community, and you really do a great thing, man. So I want to say thank you for doing what you do, and all the facets that you do. It's really a wonderful thing, and I think I can tell everybody really appreciates it.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That's greatly appreciated, especially coming from you. So thank you.
Okay, man.
All
well,
right.
Take care and stay safe. And to all your viewers out there, we'll see you around. I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm be there. I'm gonna be in Nashville someday.
Very good. Well, thank you, Tim.
Okay, take care, Ted.